Such omens suggest that the Berlin Republic is a different sort of character from its westward-leaning bomb-based predecessor. Scholars had struck several awkward coinages to describe war-chasing Germany. It was a tame power engaged in attritional multilateralism. These no longer seem apt for today's more confident and self-willed Germany, but its identity is uniformed. Germany has instincts sometimes rather than a clear articulated policy, says a senior EU official. An American diplomat believes it is still trying to decide what its foreign policy in the 21st century should look like. Germany is becoming more normal, meaning more willing to use its strength and accept responsibilities that go along with it. That looks to America like a good thing. But can Europe afford a more normal Germany? Europe wants some nice leadership. Germany's most pressing European business is to sort out the euro, the foundation on which the European edifice now rests, or the European dynamic. Euro membership promises to observe financial disciplines which may soon flouted, including Germany, which let its budget deficit breach the 3% GDP rule. That says Germany may never happen again. In September, the European Commission proposed that German-inspired rules that would limit the macroeconomic imbalances, such as excessive current account deficits, in addition to budget deficits and public debts. Rule breakers would face would face sanctions. The reform of the euro will create a more German Europe, but not quite the economic Pax Germania some observers are expecting. We need German discipline, says Sylvie Goulard, a French member of the European Parliament, but without growth it will be more difficult to make this discipline acceptable. On October 18th, Mrs Merkel and Mr Sarkozy struck a deal that would weaken the sanctions regime proposed by the Commission by letting heads of the government decide whether to impose them. In return, France agreed to support a debt restructuring procedure demanded by Germany. In Brussels, this caused dismay. The Franco-German alliance looked stronger, but German discipline and the role of the European institutions in enforcing it were weakened. German leadership is more apparent in other areas. It has assets available to none of the other big Euro members, including unparalleled trade links to rising powers. Nearly half of the EU's exports to China come from Germany. And a leader who is taken seriously by her counterparts in Mrs Merkel. David Cameron is respected, but Britain does not count, according to The Economist. I think this is absurd. Germany is claiming leading positions in EU institutions. Uwe Kosipius, Mrs Merkel's European advisor, will become Secretary General of the European Council. Alex Weber, now head of the Bundesbank, is favoured to become the next president of the European Central Bank. In European deliberations, Germany often sets the tone. Not until the Germans concluded that the Pakistani floods were really grave did the EU take action by extending trade concessions. They may well take the lead in deciding whether to recognise China as a market economy in applying international trading standards. But despite such examples of leadership, Germany's overall direction is obscure. It is torn, intrigued by its new possibilities, but painfully aware that alone it does not count for much in the world. Its population is already shrinking, and as I said, Europe will lose economic and demographic bulk relative to China in the 2020s, but will regain it in the 2050s as China's one child policy kicks in, and Europe will still attain a higher population than China or India, if you count in with Europe the West as a whole, of the United States and Canada. But during the 2020s, it will lose relative bulk to China, India, and Brazil. The EU was virtually ignored at last year's Copenhagen Summit on climate change, even though it had taken the lead in setting targets to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. This was an enormous shock, says Guy Verhofstadt, a former Belgian Prime Minister who now leads the Liberals in the European Parliament. And Belgium, again, is an artifice. Its north is dominated by the Flemish speakers and French in the south, the Walloons. Guy Verhofstadt said, "It shows that we need one voice. Fear of war launched the European project. He hopes that fear of irrelevance will drive its dynamic forward." Some quarters of the German establishment nod in agreement. Press for Germany's vision of Europe. Werner Hoyer, an aide to the foreign minister, says it is to secure Europe's success in a globalised, multipolar world. This means deepening economic integration, dismantling remaining barriers to the single market, and dealing with other powers through Brussels, not national capitals. It is our interest to convince them that the gateway to Europe is European institutions, says Mr. Hoyer. He thinks Europe must globalise its foreign policy if we don't want to be bystanders. Whether the prosaic Chancellor shares these ambitions is unclear. She is a pilot who does not believe in making announcements from the flight deck, in the Economist's view. And so Germany's partners are likely to remain on edge. The EU needs Germany's leadership more than ever, but fears its preeminence. Europe also needs consensus, but will not get it unless the Germans foster it. Matters will be even worse if Germany's economic self-confidence comes across as political arrogance. America would rather see Germany stand tall, and this heartens me. The Obama administration views Germany's rise not with consternation, but with impatience. Germany is emerging as a much more active world player, which is a good thing, says an American diplomat. The latest sign of that is the success of Germany's campaign this month to win a temporary seat on the UN Security Council, the first time it has challenged rival contenders. It has lately been an active ally to the United States, pressing Serbia to accept Kosovo's independence and toughening sanctions imposed on Iran. And Germany's dealings with Russia aroused less suspicion under Mrs. Merkel than they did with Mr. Schroeder as Chancellor, when he was Chancellor. As a triangular meeting in the French resort of Deauville this week, Mrs. Merkel and Mr. Sarkozy persuaded Russian President Dmitry Medvedev to attend NATO's forthcoming summit and to consider joining a European missile defence shield. Yet in military terms, Germany remains a midget compared not just with America, the United States, but with Britain and France, which together account for 70% of the EU's military research and development and 60% of its deployable forces. This is still larger than the United States. What is missing is Germany leading rather than seeing what Paris and London cook up, says a NATO diplomat. Its military deployments in Afghanistan and elsewhere are recent and unpopular. Its body of strategic thinkers is small. Germany's trading relationship brings influence but also inhibits its willingness to join allies to fight global threats. America and Europe are seeking slightly different answers to the questions posed by Germany's growing strength.